Amazing. All right. So great to have you here, Dr. Chuan. We are so excited to be here with you and the San Diego Fertility Center. We've been partners with the San Diego Fertility Center for a year now and are just thrilled to have such an incredible partner. So, as a little intro, Dr. Sandy Chuan is a double board certified fertility specialist with extensive experience in complex IVF cases and third-party reproduction. So anything else that you'd like to say and introduce yourself, Dr. Chuan?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sandy Chuan. As you said, thank you so much for having me today. It's really a pleasure to be here. I think, a little bit about myself. I actually grew up in Taiwan, which is interesting. I immigrated here when I was about 8.5, 9, and so I'm bilingual. I speak Mandarin, but I'm a Southern California girl. So I grew up in Southern California, went to medical school at UCLA, did my residency at Loma Linda because my husband was in practice out there at the time. He's a physician as well. And so we have a really busy and bustling household with 3 teenage kids right now. And so any case, did my residency in OBGYN there. And then I had the pleasure of matching in fellowship for fertility at UC San Diego. And so that's where I've been ever since. So I was really fortunate when I finished my fellowship in 2012 that I was able to join San Diego Fertility Center. And at the time, it was actually a really challenging time. Actually, now you wouldn't think it because it feels like the world doesn't have enough fertility specialists. But at that time, it was actually quite difficult to find a great center with a great reputation that you could find a great job with. So I was really, really happy to join the family here. And we really are a family. I always say that it takes a village to have a baby and takes lots of expertise from different people. And I really love, we have a great village, of people to help support intended parents. So I'm really fortunate to be here and love the fact that we can help people build families, but partly because of I think the fact that I've had the joy of having my 3 children, and they're teenagers now, so sometimes not always as much fun as when they were little, but still, it's parenthood is such a special thing, and it's wonderful to be able to help other people achieve that goal.
That's amazing. I have 2 siblings myself, so I'm definitely used to we had a chaos household growing up as
I call
well.
it organized chaos, organized chaos. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, organized chaos is what we live in, but it's a joy, and it's one of those things where you have to embrace, whatever comes your way and just take it with a grain of salt and just take it one step at a time. And I think that's sometimes my advice for the fertility journey too, because it does feel overwhelming, but everything is digestible if you just take it one step at a time. So
Right. Well, I'm really excited to learn from you from our conversation today. I realized I didn't have a chance to I realized I didn't have a chance to introduce myself. My name's Lauren, and I will be representing Sunfish. Our mission is to help make family building more affordable and provide financial resources because we know assisted reproduction services can be costly. And so we want to help provide solutions for your patients and many of our other partners and their patients as well. So very excited to be talking together today. Let's just start with, simple questions. What's happening in your clinic today? What did your Friday look like?
oh gosh. Well, what's happening in the clinic today? I feel like there's obviously it's always really busy. But I started the morning with an egg retrieval. And so kind of the way that our days are structured, our physicians are usually doing consultations to speak to patients who are either just starting to inquire about fertility services, or that they're already in the middle of it. And maybe we need to talk about kind of mid-cycle, what the next steps are to prepare them for the transfer. If they're looking for an egg donor or surrogate, sometimes we're touching base about how, their cycles and outcomes have been. So it's a lot of consultation to talk about the process. And then in between that, we're doing procedures, so egg retrievals in order to get eggs to create embryos. And then the next big procedure is embryo transfers. So my day has been kind of, most of my days are sprinkled throughout with consultations and procedures. And, you know, sometimes we have to do surgery to remove pathology from the uterus. So, you know, that's kind of my typical day. And the Friday's the same. You know, I usually have my Friday afternoons. I get some admin time. So that's why I have, you know, time to speak with you today. But yes.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'm glad that you had like a little sliver of time to squeeze us in. I know you guys are so busy. Uh,
Yes.
what's your favorite family? I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite, but if you had to, your favorite family success story.
I know. Well, you know, it's funny because when I get that question all the time, do you have a favorite? And I was like, well, that's like picking your favorite child, because I feel like we do get attached to obviously our patients and their journey, and we want everybody to be successful. And so it is really hard throughout the years. There've been fortunately, you know, that there's so many happy stories and outcomes. I would say that there's one story that always stands out for me, though, in my mind, and actually gets me a little bit emotional when I think about it. I had a gentleman who came from Rome. We have lots and lots of international patients because, you know, in the US, we do have the most kind of freedom of access in terms of all different types of fertility services. In many countries, there's not as much access to a donation or surrogacy when it's needed. And so I had this gentleman and from the LGBTQ community, and he came to just leave his sperm sample to start his journey. And he sat down in my office, gave me the biggest hug, and then you know, he started tearing up and just saying that he's like, I just never thought that I could become a father. And he's, you know, a little bit younger than me, but in his, you know, late 40s. And I think just for him, probably, I mean, thinking about my generation, I'm almost 50. So when I was growing up, IVF was still really new, and egg freezing when I was a resident, nobody really even talked about doing that because it just was still experimental. And so you take it for granted that over the past couple of decades, how much things have changed in terms of what we can do with this amazing technology to help people build families. And so for him, it was, I think, that revelation that he probably grew up the majority of his life not thinking that he could ever actually become a father. So for me, it was just, I don't know, the emotions that I think that must be wrapped around in that. So every time, I was the first time I think I've talked about it with someone where I didn't get teary-eyed thinking about it. But he went on to be really successful. He had 2 daughters, you know, with the egg donation and surrogacy process, and you know, and just a beautiful story. And so he'll send me pictures of them. And so I think that's one of my favorite stories, just because of kind of the impact and just realizing like the changes, not only just that you're helping someone have a family, but someone who never thought that they could, right? Because of all these other different barriers that they lived through in their lifetime. So it's pretty tremendous to me.
That's a really beautiful story. I feel like it feels to me like science at its best, right? When you're using it to open doors and like create these new opportunities.
Yes, exactly. And I sometimes feel like we're changing the world one baby at a time, you know? And yeah, it's true, right? You know, they bring so much joy and happiness to every family, but they're definitely, you know, particularly I think in the LGBTQ community, I think it's something that, you know, it has been a journey in so many different ways to get to the point now where there's such great access and great opportunity for everybody. And there's different paths to parenthood, absolutely. Lots of patients who, you know, adopt babies or adopt embryos, so they do a combination of different things to form their family. It's about love, right? Family is about love, not just about you know, genetics necessarily, I think. And so the fact that there's so many things now, we live in such a special time when people can be so open and have so much opportunity. And even for couples who, you know, maybe in the old days suffered from, you know, people always think about the fact that they say, oh my gosh, there's so many more people who are infertile. And I think, yes, there are things that are happening in our environment that I definitely think are impacting our fertility. But at the same time, I think that there are people who are accessing fertility care more. because of the fact that they know about it. There's just so much more awareness. When in the old days, like when I was young, I never heard anybody talk about, struggles getting pregnant, or, it was just and IVF was really, really, if you think about it, it's really since 1984, right? When that really became a thing. And so I think the world has evolved and is more aware of where they can get help and how they can get help, and help has become more accessible, right? And there's companies now that are offering coverage, and there's companies like Sunfish that's offering financing opportunities so that people can kind of bridge that gap and move into accessing the care that they need to build their family. And so it's very different, whereas people used to suffer in silence, right, and not have that ability. So yes, it's on the rise, but I also think it's a reflection of the fact that people are more aware and coming into the clinics to seek help.
That's such a good point. It reminds me of the mental health conversation as well. When something's destigmatized, there
Yeah.
becomes this question of like, oh, is it because more people are talking about it, or is it like because more people are comfortable, or because the prevalence is higher?
Right. And I think it's probably a combination of both, but I think it's when you think about it now, like I think there was a statistic that was published, like my kids, even when they were growing up, they're teenagers now. I think there was something like 10% of the kids in their class were born through fertility treatments, like through IVF. It's quite a big number. And I think that number is probably still increasing if we were to look at it now. My oldest is 19. So, it's a lot has changed in 20 years. But even then, when I went to his preschool and people found out I was a fertility specialist, I would get all the stories, right? Oh my gosh, this is, I went through this to have my son, or I did this to have my daughter. And when I go to dinner parties, I get all kinds of stories about, and questions, right? About, oh my gosh, we're trying to have a family, this and that, or this about my hormones, and I love it because it just, we all should learn about our bodies and know about what's possible to do this one thing that's, usually for everybody really fundamental and really important.
Totally. I even get questions now, and I'm going totally off script for this, but I feel like with my peers, it's much more like about the fact that infertility is never a conversation. Like it's always just expected that it's not a problem. But now you see people on social media being open, like you said, about it being this journey that they're on. And so there's sort of this like dichotomy between what you are told at the doctor and then also what you see online.
I know, it's true. I mean, I think that's the one thing. I think there's lots of things about social media that I find challenging, especially raising teenagers.
Right.
But at the same time, I think, it is also helpful for people to be able to have a platform to share their story. I just think the hard part is the information is not always filtered, and so it can be difficult to discern, right? The source, etc. But I think when it comes to personal journeys, it's always helpful for people to know, like, hey, I'm not alone. And actually, when you hear somebody, talk about something, it might trigger your own process or your thought process, and actually give you some courage to like go and seek out help or ask those questions or get that tidbit of information. I think knowledge is power. I definitely believe in kind of empowering my patients, my intended parents, with information so that they can make informed decisions, because it's not a cookie cutter situation. And lots of things, there's so many different things and different ways we can approach the treatment process, even that it may be dependent on what's important to you as a person, as a family. And so that's part of what we spend our consultation talking about sometimes, because I like to teach people about, okay, this is the technical aspect of it and what's possible and what's not possible, but how you approach, how you go about it or what you do may have to do with what your life goals are. So
Totally.
yeah. So
And this is why we're so lucky too to bring on experts like you, because I totally agree. There is so much information, but how do you sift through the noise and know what to believe and what to trust? And so it's been great to actually be able to talk to experts and bring REIs on our channel. It's like what we're trying to do with Just Keep Swimming for sure. I so appreciate all your answers. I'm gonna take us back to talking about third-party journeys a little bit, because I know that's something you've been focusing on, and I would love to discuss the process a little bit with you.
sure.
Uh, what options do gay male couples have to build their family?
Sure. I think lots of different options here. I think the most traditional before the event of IVF has been traditional adoption, right? And I think that still remains a really viable option for gay couples. But we are now in the day and age where couples can, you know, engage in an egg donor and a surrogate in order to help them, build their family. And so they certainly can, find an egg donor, create embryos. And if there's two partners using each of their sperm in something what we call the split insemination, so we're creating two sets of embryos, each with a biological link to each of the intended parents, and then save those embryos. And typically, because the journey can be costly in terms of engaging the surrogacy aspect, usually one partner will start first and have their first child, and then you save the embryos for future use. So that's a really common method. I also have intended parents that will go through embryo donation. So I think of embryo donation, it's kind of a spectrum of adoption in a way, right? But you're just adopting the embryo really, really, really early. And so we do have, like, for example, a small in-house program where we have intended parents who've finished with their own journey, but have some great quality embryos remaining that they want to share with others. A lot of these are egg donor embryos. And so they're very good quality. We do screen for quality. And then, they're donated to the other family, and there is a match process. And then that family can use those donated embryos rather than creating their own embryos, can use these donated embryos and engage in a surrogate, or even a woman who wants to carry herself. It's also an option. But and so those are kind of the general categories of options.
Amazing. And just to underscore, because we get this question a lot from our same-sex male couples, can a male couple pass both of their genes on to their offspring? I think you were touching on this a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that I get this all the time too, where can I take one egg and inseminate with both of our sperms so both of us pass on our genetics to the same child? And that's not possible, because really, to create a viable embryo, you need one egg and one sperm. And so even though you can have, a family in which the children have a biological link through the egg donor, so you could use the same egg donor to create embryos with each of the intended father's sperm, so that you get two groups with intended parent A and then intended parent B. You can't do it where it's the same genetics from both, right? So but you can have a genetic link through the egg donor, which I think for a lot of families that's very important to them. And so, like I said, with egg donors, sometimes you have these egg donors that definitely are super prolific, can get a lot of eggs in one round of treatment, that can allow, both intended parents to get enough embryos to achieve each of their own pregnancy. But you do have to be thoughtful about which donor that is, because not every woman who's healthy and young is that prolific. Most will be able to give you at least enough embryos for one child. But when you're doing a split insemination, you do have to be thoughtful about what type of donor you're selecting. But yes, absolutely. Sometimes people will do 2 rounds with the same donor because they love the donor and they really want their children to be related in that way. So, it's definitely possible.
That's so interesting. And how do you recommend people go about choosing an egg donor?
Oh my gosh, I wish it was a simple answer. But I kind of think of it, you break up the maybe the humanistic aspect, right? Versus the biological and medical aspect. So when you're picking an egg donor, obviously it has to be someone who just somehow you feel maybe it's the way they look or the smile. Sometimes it's not just about the fact that, I joke around, like, it's not like picking an apple. There is a feeling, right? Of like, you feel a connection. I really like her smile, or I like something she wrote and something she answers. So I think that's the humanistic aspect. Maybe there's ethnicity might be important. Sometimes people are, looking to kind of match their ethnic background. So those are all the kind of very personal things and characteristics that you're looking for in a donor. And then there's certain things like family history that I feel like is kind of bridges both, which is also a little bit of personal aspect, but also has that health aspect and the medical background that's important. So all the donors will talk to a genetic counselor to go through a really deep dive of her family history and to make sure there's no risk factors. That's the purpose of that. But it also then gives the intended parent some insight into her family history. They will usually provide a pretty general kind of family history on their profile, but there's a deep dive done by a professional. And so I think that kind of bridges both, and that can be important too. And then the last part is the medical aspect, right? So I would say that all donors are going to go through a medical screening process in order for us to assess what her ovarian reserve is. So meaning that every woman has her own ovarian reserve. Those are the eggs that she's born with. And then every month, a woman will allocate a group of eggs to come out and compete and ovulate. But how many she allocates is really dependent on her individual reserve. So kind of like height. Some people are 5'2", like me. And then there's some people who are 6'2". So just likewise, I have donors that are really healthy and young that have about 15 follicles per kind of cycle. And that's where her body's at. Perfectly normal number. That's our normal cutoff. But I also then have donors that will allocate 30. And so the difference between those two women is that most likely the person who starts out with more follicles as you go through the IVF process, and there's a natural attrition rate. This is a natural selection process. It's almost like running a little mini marathon, and I'm trying to help you get semifinalists. And then hopefully in your semifinalists, if you have a good group of them, we have some champs. And so in that process, you are going to weed out candidates. So if you start out with more candidates, so to speak, you're going to hopefully get to the finish line with more candidates, right? And so it's just a numbers game. And then there's some biological variation and difference between people that start with the same number but may have variable responses. So that's something that I go through with my intended parents during the consultation in a little bit more detail, but that's something to keep in mind, that we will assess, what is the follicle count for the donor? We measure some hormone levels to make sure they're in the normal zone. And then you have to really then look at and say, well, what are my family building goals, right? So if I'm a single guy and I'm just looking to have one child and I don't really have a strong preference if it's a boy or a girl, I'm not looking at that. I just want to have, one child, and that's my goals. You really probably could pick any donor that would pass the medical screening process, because I feel that the majority of young women who have at least 15 follicles are going to create enough embryos, if you're at a clinic with great success rates, to be able to get you to your goal of having one child. But if you're a couple that wants to split a group of eggs, or you each have some preferences, sometimes I get couples that he really wants a girl, but he really wants a boy, or we really both want boys just because we think as men it might be a little bit easier to raise boys, just because of that. Everybody's got something different that they feel about that, and it's all okay. I think it's just, you need to know what your preferences are, if you have any. And that means that you're expecting more from your egg donor's biology. And just like I said, at 5'2", I'm never going to dunk a basketball or be able to even get close to the rim, And so I might be able to shoot a basket, but there's just certain things that I can't reach for. So I think you just need to have clarity on what your goals are. If there are loftier goals, then when you're selecting the donor, you have to be aware of that. But I also have intended parents who really, really love a certain donor and recognize that her ovarian reserve may be just more in the average zone, but they're willing to do 2 rounds with her because they're choosing her because of this aspect that I talked about, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's definitely a very individual decision. My goal is always to try to get you to your goals within 1 round, but there's always risk and benefits and choices that you make right in that decision. And so sometimes I do have intended parents that know that their donors count is normal but not super prolific, but they love her, and so they choose her, and we'll do the first round, see how it goes. Sometimes we're surprised for the better. Sometimes someone with conservative numbers can come out with a really, kind of higher number of embryos than you anticipated, just because that's their biology, and that group of eggs mixed with the sperm's biology, that creates the quality of the embryo. And so in any case, I think we see how the first round goes. And then if we need to, sometimes then, they do a second round, but you have to be aware, right? Because sometimes for some people, as you've mentioned, the financials does end up being kind of an important factor for everyone, because it is a costly process and there's a lot to think about.
Totally. Wow, there's so many factors that go into that. Since you brought up the financials, we estimate that this process takes about like 200,000 all in. What are some financial resources available to folks at your clinic for starting this journey?
Yeah, so I think the $200,000 all in is, I would say, a significant chunk of that is actually the surrogacy aspect. And so
Right.
I always um, recommend that my intended parents speak to the surrogacy agencies. Once they talk to the clinic and understand the medical process and have a better framework, because I think that's important, then they should talk to the surrogacy agencies to understand kind of what are the nuances of the cost and what to project, because usually the majority of that is put into a trust, but they need to have that money up front. But the journey doesn't have to be done all in one shot. And so a lot of times what people do will be, they deposit sperm first and then match with an egg donor and create embryos in part one. And then it takes time to match with a surrogate, to screen a surrogate. They could delay that second part where the majority of the cost is, they could delay that until a bit later. And so that allows them more opportunity to figure out finances. So it's not this giant number all at once. And at the clinic, sorry, my furry little chair thing. Sorry.
I love the
I know now, no more angel wings. So, I think that at the clinic, I do have patients and intended parents that are lucky and they may have some coverage and benefits from their companies. There's more and more companies that are offering, different availability for coverage for egg donation even, and maybe even a little bit of reimbursement for surrogacy, but that's probably not the large majority. And then alongside that, I have financing options like through Sunfish, and so I think those are probably the two most common ways people are coming up with some financing options. Occasionally, I do have people who will go into kind of their 401k in combination with something else, because this is considered a medical procedure, medical necessity. So we have had, intended parents and people go that direction in combination with financing and whatnot to kind of make that more digestible.
That's a really great overview on all the options, because I know it is such an expensive process, but you laid it out very well for everyone. I'm going to direct things a little bit more broadly. We kind of brought this up earlier on, and it's a bit of a selfish question on my end, but I'm super curious when we were talking about infertility being on the rise. What do you mentioned that there, potentially some factors contributing to that. What do you see as contributing? And then sort of related, do you recommend any sort of like more holistic practices, or would you like, from a medical perspective, how do you evaluate maybe more holistic treatments that don't have or aren't as like typically referred to in like the research as something that you should do for a medical procedure?
Yeah. Well, let me say this. I do think that our environment is just so different now than when our grandparents grew up, right? I mean, we have there's just so much more pollution in the world, and it's difficult to say, always pinpoint. There's people definitely studying it. They feel like plastics and, all the different things that are, we sleep on beds with flame retardants, right? There's a lot of oxidative stress. There's pesticides in our food, and, all those things probably, depending on who you are and what your genetics are, could play a role, but you can't necessarily take yourself away from all of that. We all have to live. Right. And I think about the susceptibility kind of theory, which is, for example, we all know that smoking leads to lung cancer or can lead to lung cancer. It's not an absolute statement, right? And so there's lots of people who smoke their whole lives. that may get some other complications from the smoking, but they don't necessarily get lung cancer. And then there are people who just breathe the air that we all breathe, and they never have smoked a day in their lives, and they get lung cancer. And so I think of many biological processes and diseases like the same way. And we think of that as the, two-hit theory, which is you have some genetic predisposition, and then there's some environmental insult that leads to that. And so I don't know that there's any way that you can say, I'm just going to prevent myself from getting into those situations, because at the end of the day, we can't take ourselves and deep clean and then like go into a totally unpolluted environment.
Yeah, we
So
can't live in a vacuum.
we can't, I wish I could, but
Yeah.
we can't, right? And by and large, human beings are still pretty tough and pretty robust. And so despite all of that, even though that I think the cases of people coming into us to seek care is rising, I still think in general, I don't want to put paranoia out there into the world of everybody thinking that they're going to, all have problems. But we do see couples with unexplained infertility where on paper, sperm count's great, ovarian reserve looks good, fallopian tubes are open, uterine tract is looking good, all of those things, and they're still struggling. And I just don't think that we're at the point where science can give us all the answers, to exactly why those particular people are still having trouble. But if you're trying to live a healthier life, I think, oxidative stress is bad for all of our cells. So that's why there's so many things people talk about antioxidants, right? So coenzyme Q10, omega-3s, vitamin C, or taking a daily vitamin are all things that can kind of neutralize, I think, environmental insults. So I do put my patients on that, particularly my patients who are older, whose ovaries already with kind of just natural chronological aging, because the egg is the oldest cell in the body. It's the only one that doesn't regenerate. Everything else, when you age, when the cells don't function well, your body gets rid of it and grow you a new set, but not with the eggs. And so that's why I think the time itself is the biggest insult. And then you layer on top of that, maybe the environment that adds to it. So it's not that taking these antioxidants are going to reverse whatever time is done, but maybe you can try to neutralize. Same with sperm. Sperm is produced and then stored, and the environment can damage it. Not every guy is going to have the same susceptibility, but some might. So antioxidants is something that I am kind of, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't want anybody to feel guilty if they forget a dose, but I think it could be helpful.
Oh my gosh, I'm taking notes. I'm like, you sold me. I'm getting omega-3s and vitamin C.
And there you go. And a CoQ10, daily. I mean,
Yeah, whatever that is.
yeah. It's really big in heart health. I think it's good for your heart health, your brain health. I think eating a Mediterranean diet. Everybody always talks about, what's a good reproductive kind of diet? I would say the Mediterranean diet, high protein, low carbs, and lots of fruits and vegetables, because fruits and vegetables are your best natural source of antioxidants. And I also think that insulin, which is produced when you eat a lot of carbohydrates, and you can get these insulin spikes, is pro-inflammatory. So inflammation is obviously a form of stress and oxidative stress for all of your cells, not just your reproductive cells. So I think, to me, the Mediterranean diet is a good approach just for general health. And anything that's going to make you generally healthy, I think could benefit, your reproductive health. Although sometimes I get patients who say, I work out, I do yoga, I'm this, I do all these things, I'm super healthy. And I said, that's great. But then why are my ovaries struggling? And I always say, because the ovaries have an independent timeline, and an independent thing where you could be in the best general health, but it's just because it's the only cell that doesn't regenerate, that no matter what you do to kind of maintain it, time still ends up having such a negative impact. So that's why I think that for me, my biggest kind of advice for young women, especially, is think about, preserving your fertility. Think about egg freezing. That wasn't something that was available necessarily to the women of my generation. But the young women in this generation, it is still expensive, it is costly, but I think of it like an investment in your future. We all put money into our 401ks to prepare for when we get older, all the things to be a responsible human and adult, right? But we don't always, and we're not taught to, I think more now than before, but we're not taught to think about, preserving our fertility in the same way that we're taught to try to prevent pregnancy and do same sex,
Yeah.
do same sex, right? So in any case, I think that's the message that, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and since she was young, I've talked to her about egg freezing, and I always joke around. I'm like, when you graduate college, you're going to get two gifts. You're going to get one that you get to pick whatever you want. And then mommy's going to gift you the gift of eggs. And she goes, I don't even know if I want to, have kids. I was like, la, la, la.
I love that. Oh my
I
God.
know. But I said to her, I said, you may not, and that's totally your choice. And you may not know what you want. I said, but in life, we want to have options and backup plans and a plan B. I'm always about leaving yourself options. You may not choose to go down that path, or maybe you might be that person who chooses to have a career and enjoy life, travel, all the things that you want to do. But unfortunately, we have the reality, which when you talk to me about aging, it's like the biggest factor is just time, right? And so we're delaying reproduction, and sometimes for very good reasons. And that's okay. But it does mean that you should plan, because maybe you'll be that person who, gets married a little bit later, has your first kid in your late 30s, totally fine. Lots of people still get pregnant in their late 30s naturally. Not everybody needs my help, which is great. But sometimes I see those patients for baby number two, right? Because, right. And so maybe those frozen eggs from when they were in their 20s or early 30s could be for baby number two. So I just think that thinking about that as something on the to-do list of planning to prepare for your future is
Yeah, your daughter has a great gift, even though she doesn't know it yet. She's very sweet.
I think I might have her sold. When she was 12, it was no. Now she kind of tells everybody, my mom says I'm gonna freeze my egg.
Peace of mind of it.
Yeah.
But okay, I have two quick last questions for you. First, because you work at San Diego Fertility Center, which is one of the largest and most well-known fertility clinics, and we've been a partner of yours for a while, and see intended parents and patients come from literally all over the world to work with you. So what do you see as the few things that make San Diego Fertility Center unique?
Yeah. I think that obviously, I think bias. I love the people here. I think that we have a great team. Like, as I said earlier, it takes a village, to have a baby and to raise a baby. And I think it's not just what I do. Obviously, what the physician does in terms of dictating your care and your treatment is important. Obviously, it's very vital to the process. So it's important to have a great team of physicians. So I would say one of the most lucky things I have is I have 4 other great partners who also have a wealth of experience and really care about their patients, really are passionate about what they do the same way that I am. So we're aligned in those goals. And so that's been the focus for us is, patient-centered care. And so with that, we built a village of people who also are aligned in those goals of putting our patients first, but we do also understand the logistics are very complicated. So, not only do you want to have compassionate people, you need to have compassionate people who have a plan, right? And who understand how the process needs to happen. And so we have the expertise and we have the infrastructure and the system built in, because third-party reproduction is different from just IVF. There's lots of parts of IVF that are layered into it, but there's just a lot more logistic and different moving parts. And so we have the infrastructure for IVF. Certainly, we have a great team for IVF, but we also have a unique and great team for all the things that are needed in third-party reproduction. And so, yes, it's about people. It's about the way they care about the patients, but it's also about how we run the process and the infrastructure you build around it. So I think those are the 2 things that I do think are very unique about kind of our focus. And then I think last piece is, everybody that's doing IVF should have a wonderful embryology lab, right? Because that's the foundation of your magic, your success. So I do think we have an amazing embryology team, really experienced, with a lot of depth. and really strive for perfection in the lab in what they deliver and what they do. And I think that's really important to the process as well. And then I guess I said that was the last thing, but I think if you really ask me, I think finances are important. I'm not so good at telling you exactly what things cost, and that's not my forte, but I do understand that, it's a really big financial commitment for our patients and our intended parents. And so when we make decisions, even from the clinical side, we are not wasteful. Like, we are thoughtful about kind of how to maximize, right, for the intended parent and for the patients. And then our finance team also tries to make sure that they are explaining things in a way that is digestible for the intended parents, so that they know like kind of what they need to plan for, and how to plan for it. And like I said, partnering with people who can help them in that aspect is important. So for us, it's really the whole thing. And so we have a very, like you said, holistic and maybe global view on the treatment process in terms of understanding what the emotional impact, right? And then what the, logistical, and then the financial impact.
Exactly. No, I know at Sunfish, it feels like such a huge part of it is just giving people as much information as we possibly can about like what is to come, and like tailoring that towards the patients, because sometimes you feel like you're looking at a black box of unexpected costs in the future.
Yes, and that's huge, right? It's expectation. So
Right.
if you don't know or understand what it is you are
Overwhelming.
signing up for, right? Like, meaning that you don't know what the treatment process entails, the time frame that it entails, what are the different pieces, where monetary expectations may come up, then you're going to be, it's a black box, and you're going to be kind of blind to what you need to prepare for, right? But when people give you that big number, like you said, of 200,000 for egg donation and surrogacy, I know that number just sounds really scary to people all at once, because it seems like all at once, but it isn't, because it is digestible. So once you understand the process, this is why I think it's important to have a consultation with your fertility specialist, or so that they can tell you, okay, these are the different parts. This is what you need to do. This is probably when you're going to do this. You're going to do this first, and then this second, and then this. So you can kind of see how it plays out. And then really, I think a good surrogacy agency will walk the intended parents through as well. Like in the very beginning part, when they're doing the consultation, like these are the points in the journey, like when you need to have your money ready, how much you're looking at, what, because even for example, surrogate compensation, it's not given all at once. A lot of people think when they see a number on a page that they have to give that to the surrogate all at once. No, that is also broken up in the journey in parts, with the final, obviously bigger section at the end, but it's not like all at once. Although with surrogacy, they do have an escrow that they want you to kind of have your money safely there, because they are also trying to protect the surrogate who's helping you. So there's all of those logistics, but I think understanding the process, to your point, as financial experts, if you understand the process, then you can also help them digest kind of what needs to come when, and make it less overwhelming and more accessible.
Totally. This has been so fun and enlightening. Last question. What about the future of fertility is the most exciting to you?
Wow. I think we're already living in a really exciting time. So I think, a lot of the things that we never thought could happen are already happening, freezing eggs, freezing embryos for fertility preservation. I think that there's still, though, so many things about the body that we don't understand. For example, uterine factor, when people have, they're the people who are struggling, right? Not the patients who are using an egg donor and surrogate where it usually goes smoothly, but really the patients who are struggling with their egg quality, or uterine factor, which is not as common, but definitely happens, where they keep having implantation failure. I hope that in the near future, at some point, we can figure out a way to really find something that may help improve egg quality, or something that can help us understand more about what's at play in terms of implantation, the things that we can manipulate to try to improve that. But it feels like when you talk about the black box, there's still some certain things that it's just on a microscopic level so difficult to study. And so, I think there will be a point in my lifetime probably that some of those things will come to fruition, but it's still a mystery. And so I do look forward to that. But I think we're already living in really exciting times where I think that the vast majority of patients, that comes into the clinic, we're able to help them achieve their family building goals.
That's so incredible. Yeah, this has been very uplifting and optimistic. So thank you again, Dr. Chuan, for joining us with Sunfish and San Diego Fertility Center. I so appreciate your time. I've learned a ton.
I'm glad. You're
Yeah,
so welcome. It's my pleasure. And you can't get me to stop talking. So
I know. I'll stop the recording.